Hello, beauties. Welcome back to Midlife by Human Design. Today's pod is the next logical step after last week's pod, where we talked about being too much, being too opinionated, too intense, too emotional, too sensitive, etc., etc. And this week, I want to talk about the flip side of the coin, which is feeling not enough. And I think that it comes up, A, just as part of the human experience, and B, a lot in midlife, because there's so much that is changing in our lives, and we are going through perimenopause or into early menopause and feeling our bodies changing, and it leads to this sense of not enoughness, not being good enough in some way, shape, or form. And I saw this come to the forefront this week when I posted something on Threads, which was basically like, if you desire something that makes you feel again, that makes you feel loved, that makes you feel giddy, all of this coming from Heated Rivalry, of course, then fucking go get it. And stop making excuses about why you can't, or coming up with a million reasons why it'll never work. And for the most part, women that replied were saying like something to the effect of, thank you for sharing this, and I really needed to hear this today, etc., etc. And there were a couple of outliers who kind of dug in their heels and they were like, no, actually, it is too late for me. It can never happen. And on the one hand, to that, I want to say, look, if you believe that it will never happen for you and that's what you want, then great. Like, who am I to argue with that? Who am I to try to change your mind? Like, you deserve the life that you desire. And that's my point. So if you're arguing that it'll never happen for you, but it's something that you desire, then I feel like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You know, in a way, you're succumbing to your own conditioning. And those beliefs are so strong that they have the power to dictate what your life looks like. So if you believe that it's never going to happen for you, then you're probably right. So this led me to thinking about an episode for this week to complement last week's and to also speak to that feeling of not enoughness, because it led me to thinking about, where do those deep-seated beliefs come from? And I think they come from our openness, or wherever we happen to be undefined in our body graph. So, of course, if you don't have your chart, go to my website, lorileeside.com, and run it. And take a look at the different shapes, also called centers, and see which ones are colored in and which ones are white. And we're going to focus on the centers this week that are white. And if they don't have any numbers colored in, those are called gates, then they're completely open. And if they are white, but they do have some gates defined or gates colored in, then that means that the center itself is undefined. So defined centers, as we remember from last week, give us consistent energy. It's energy that we can rely on and we can count on to be there for the most part. Now, there are centers that pulse on and off, like the root, for example, but for the most part, it's consistent energy for us. And Undefined centers or open centers, on the flip side, are inconsistent for us because they are where we take in and amplify other people's energy. But we don't have it for ourselves to rely upon. And that can also be inconsistent, though, because sometimes we will experience that energy. So, for example, if you have gate 9 in your sacral, but it's a hanging gate, meaning that it's not connected to the 52, then that means that anytime the 52 is activated through a planetary transit, so for example, when the sun comes into gate 52 in June, then we suddenly get to borrow that energy. And if we didn't already have a defined sacral and a defined root, then we're going to have that for that period of time when the opposite gate is being transited. So when 52 in this example is being transited, which let's say the sun is coming through 52, it's there for around 6 days. So toward the end of June, beginning of July, if you have gate 9, but you don't have 52, then your root is going to kick on. And so you're going to feel consistent pressure, and maybe you'll get a little bit more done that week than you would normally. This just as an example. So we can experience the energy through planetary transits, but it's not something that is ours to live on the regular. And the struggle around this is where conditioning happens as well. And conditioning meaning other people's expectations, other people's experiences, cloud or color your experience. And as a human, we are here to condition one another. That is how it works, being here together on this planet. So it's not a weakness that this is happening. It's just, this is what happens. And I think by the time we reach midlife, we get to this point, especially with the declining estrogen, where we give a lot less fucks about what other people expect of us. You know, we've been on the planet, we've been in these bodies for long enough where it's not so important to us to play nice, to do what other people expect of us, as it is for us to be our authentic selves. And the transition into that can be a little bit rocky, and it can be a little tricky even moving into your early 50s, living this and practicing it. But ultimately, your open or undefined centers, this is your soul curriculum. This is like, okay, when you decided to come here, you looked at how you were going to create this human, and you said, these are the things that I want to learn. These are the things that I want to practice in this lifetime. And wherever you have openness, that's what you decided, because that's where you get to ultimately build empathy, build wisdom, and learn from other people about what that energy is all about. It's also where you can see it and appreciate it in others. These centers are also where we can feel a little bit uncomfortable or like we aren't enough, like we aren't showing up with that energy and we feel like we should be. So, as I mentioned earlier, midlife is this time of shedding that conditioning, ideally. And thank you, hormones, for helping us to do that. But the struggle is that women oftentimes have spent their entire lives building identities around this feeling of not enoughness, around your open or undefined centers. It's like you feeling like, for example, if you have an undefined root, that you are always trying to catch up. You're always in a hurry and have a million things on your to-do list. And so you've created this identity around being a box checker, or perhaps you have gotten really organized and you have specific systems that help you to deal with that pressure. And I think that this transition into midlife is such a beautiful invitation to start questioning some of those long-held habits that we have that really just are ways to deal with these undefined centers that feel uncomfortable. So let's walk through each of the centers. I'm just going to do a very brief overview of each of them as I did last week. So let's start at the head, which is at the top. And oftentimes, if you are undefined or open here, then you're going to feel like you don't have good ideas, or you don't know the answer, or you're never inspired the way you wish you were, or you don't have the imagination that you wish you did. And again, this is not about having something constant. It's about understanding that there are ebbs and flows. And you are meant to be curious. You are meant to be pulling in inspiration. Moving down from the top center to the second from the top, the ajna, or the mind. And this is our filter. This is where we become certain. This is where we have opinions about things. Sometimes you're going to have the answer, but sometimes you're not. And sometimes you're going to feel really strongly about your opinions. And sometimes you'll be able to be swayed. People will be able to change your mind. And the gift of that is being open-minded. It's being flexible. And what I want you to understand is that it is indeed a gift. And there's a real wisdom here that can build for you. And I think that an undefined ajna forces you even more into your body for decision making, which I think is another beautiful gift. All right, let's move on to the undefined throat, which is the square toward the top of the chart, third center down. And this is your center for manifestation. This is your center for speaking your truth. And when you don't have a defined throat, it can be really tricky getting your thoughts out into the world. I mean, if you've been listening to this pod for a while, you've heard me stumble plenty of times, and I have an undefined throat. It is not consistent for me, and actually putting this pod out on a weekly basis is a bit of my own conditioning, because I have this belief that I want to continue doing this and stay committed to it, because there's this huge part of me that loves it, and it does light me up. And plus also, I don't always have that consistent access to my voice. And some pods are better than others in terms of my ability to flow, in terms of my ability to communicate what I'm actually trying to share with you. And yeah, if you've been listening for long enough, then you can really sense that. As opposed to somebody who has a defined throat, their access to that throat energy is going to be so much more consistent versus somebody who doesn't. So people who have undefined throats have to really tune into timing in communication and when they feel like they have something to say, and then trusting that if you don't have something to say, it doesn't mean that your voice doesn't matter. It just means that you are trusting in your timing. You're trusting that nothing that is meant for you will ever miss you. And when you do have something important to say, that it will come to you and you'll be able to share it. So the gift of this is really that those people who you get them as sometimes quiet, although undefined throats can notoriously be chatterboxes as well. But it's like the person who just drops these gems and they feel like out of nowhere. And you're like, wow, I had no idea that you were thinking that, or that that's where you were coming from. And it's just because they haven't chosen to flood the airwaves with their consistent thoughts and thinking out loud. It's more of an internal process that then comes about when the time feels right and when they feel like they have a fully formed thought that is able to be expressed out of that undefined throat. Moving down to the G center, which is the diamond in the center of the chart, this is a sense of not really knowing who you are or feeling like you have this consistent sense of self. And this can be a little tricky for women because they feel like they should be consistent. They should show up as the same person in multiple different scenarios. And I think that this is one of the most beautiful centers to be undefined, but I also have a theater background. And so for me as an actress, being able to take on different roles, the undefined G is like, chef's kiss. Thank you very much for putting that in my design. But it's also adaptability and being able to relate to other people and read other people. And it's not so much having to worry about who you are, but understanding that you get to be so many different people depending on your environment, depending on the people who surround you. And as you get into midlife, understanding like, wow, actually, the people that surround me really make a difference in who I am. And if I'm not happy with who I am or how life is unfolding for me and who I am being in it, then I should really take a look at who I'm surrounding myself with, who I'm spending time with. And I work with a lot of women who have an undefined G, and navigating that is part of the work that we do in my one-to-one containers. It's like, how do you make decisions when you feel like you can be different people depending on the scenario? And sometimes having somebody to work through that together with and apply it is exactly what you need to get unstuck, to feel confident with that being an undefined center in your chart and understanding the energetics and how it actually works in your favor. Okay, let's move on to the sacral, which is the square center below the diamond-shaped center, the G center. And if you have an undefined sacral, it means you're a projector, a manifestor, or a reflector. You're in roughly 30% of the population. And your conditioning is going to be around not being able to keep up, not understanding when enough is enough, going until you burn out. And I see plenty of burnout in midlife women, especially women who have high-powered jobs, who have just consistently hit the go button without question, have built up this life that they thought they wanted, and then gotten to this point where they realize everything around them is making them extremely unhappy, and this isn't at all what they want to be spending their life doing anymore. You are not designed for endless, go, build, create, get it done kind of energy. This is not you. If you're undefined here, need to start centering rest and building an understanding of what is sustainable for you. That is your superpower. Let's talk about the solar plexus, which is, if you're looking at the chart, the right facing in toward the sacral. And this is our emotional capacity. If you are feeling too sensitive, quote, then this is probably undefined or open. Because again, every time we have openness or no definition, that's where we take in and amplify energy. So if you're taking in and amplifying other people's emotional energy, you are going to be feeling it to a huge, huge degree. And your gift is this profound emotional awareness. But if you don't understand that, it's going to leave you wrecked. So how do you learn how to balance that with boundaries, which is really what is called for when you have an undefined solar plexus? Okay, let's circle back around and move up to the heart, which is the little isosceles triangle. And this is the heart or the ego. If this is undefined, then this is where our sense of worthiness lives. And I did a whole episode on the heart center, which I will link in the show notes, around worthiness and around where does my worth come from? And listen, only about 30%-ish of the population has this defined. So the majority of people are feeling this woundedness here. And I feel like the comments that I was reading on threads around, it's too late for me. I'm married. I have a house. I have all of the responsibilities you can think of. And these are all of the reasons that feel very, very real, right? They are 3D tangible reasons for us to feel like we need to just keep continuing in the lives that we're living. But the truth is that if you are feeling something, if you're feeling a pull, if you're feeling drawn to something, if you're feeling intuitive hits about something, if you watch a show like Heated Rivalry and you want what they have, that is an indication that somewhere in the multiverse here, some version of you has it. It's like a little whisper from another version of you saying, hey, you can have this too. And I think that most of the women responding in that thread who said, oh man, this could never be me, all of these reasons why, I would venture to guess that they have an undefined heart center. And this is the center that believes that we are worthy. It helps us to root that in. And for most of us walking around with an undefined heart center, it's like it's inconsistent. That feeling of worthiness is inconsistent. And the gift is being able to see our worthiness in those times when a transit is happening or when we're around other people who have a heart center defined, and building wisdom around what that means, around even when we don't necessarily feel worthy, understanding that we are worthy just by virtue of being a human being walking around on this beautiful planet. All right, let's talk about the spleen, which is on the left-hand side of the sacral, facing in toward the sacral. And this is where our intuition lives. It's where our instincts live. It's where our sense of safety lives. And this intuition, when you have it undefined here, again, it's inconsistent. And it means that sometimes you're going to be able to tap in. Sometimes it's going to be more challenging. It also means that you may just not have a consistent way that your intuition speaks to you. It may come in sometimes as a whisper in your ear. It may come in sometimes as a flash of a photo in front of you. It may come from a song that you hear. There are so many different ways that it could come to you. And so having some openness here gives you the opportunity to experience it in many different ways and build up that awareness of those subtle signals. When you are able to do that, that is your gift of being able to interpret and hear your intuition speaking to you in all of the different ways. And then the last one, which I touched on earlier, your root, which is the very last center at the bottom. And this is the feeling of always being behind or feeling like you're rushed, feeling like you have to do XYZ in order to rest. And you're amplifying pressure from other people around you. You're taking in that root pressure from other people. That's where that busyness, that's where that constant rush is coming from. And I think that something that would be interesting to consider here is, as I was saying earlier, those habits that you've built over time to help you deal with that pressure, thinking about what would happen if you didn't fall into some of those habits or if you didn't utilize some of your tools. So I'm thinking about one of my besties who has an undefined root, and she is very organized. She always has a to-do list going. She loves to check it off. She keeps a little notebook with her, and I think about what would happen if you just lost your notebook for a month. What would happen? And I can see her eyes now, just imagining this, widening and being like, no way, I could never do it. I could never do it. And I think that this kind of question is a great question to ask yourself for any of your undefined centers, really. But using the root as an example, what is the worst that could happen? Because what people with undefined roots tend to fall into is this belief that, oh my God, like I'm never going to get all of the things done that I need to get done. And if I don't keep them organized, then I'll never be able to relax again. And I'll drop all kinds of balls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And okay, like maybe you will drop some balls. And so what? Like, so what? What impact will that have? And even the worst case scenario that you can imagine, how bad is it? What would happen if you prioritized your peace over that stress? What might that look like? So this is what we do when we decondition, is challenging the habits, challenging the stories that we have told ourselves about who we need to be, and taking back what feels right and true for us in our authenticity. Looking at your body graph chart, making sure that you are living in alignment with what is consistent for you. So for me, for example, I have 4 centers that are consistent: my root, my sacral, my solar plexus, and my spleen. So if I'm honoring those and only trying to be consistent with that energy, then that is one of the things that helps to bring me into alignment. Versus if I'm trying to make sure I'm certain about everything, or that I always have ideas, or that I have this consistent way of communicating, and that I always have the words that I need to express how I'm feeling. You know, those kinds of things are me falling into conditioning. So if defined centers are where you're, quote, too much, and undefined centers are where you're not enough, recognizing that these are just stories, and neither of those stories is true. This is just about what energy you have consistently that you can show up with, and where you are here to experience life, and in what way. Are you here to show up consistently with this type of energy and share it with others? Or are you here to take it from others and amplify it and learn from it? And midlife tends to be the time when the strategies that we've been using to cope, or the stories that we've been telling ourselves to mask what wasn't working, this tends to be the time when those break down. when we start to really get curious about what is behind them and how do we stop spending so much of our life trying to fit in to a box that was never designed for us. And we realize that we've spent decades trying to prove something, that we're like enough in all of the various places that we are undefined. So look at your chart and get curious. Have I been trying to prove that I'm enough in all of my undefined centers? And what has that meant for my life? How has that shaped who I have become as a person? And how does that inform who I want to be moving forward? Because we're only halfway through life, right? And looking at your chart and seeing it in front of you in black and white can bring so much compassion to your process. So, a couple of questions I want to leave you with to reflect upon when you're thinking about your chart and you're looking at where you have definition and where you don't. Where have you spent your life trying to prove that you're enough? What if that area of your chart is an undefined center and was never actually meant to be consistent in the first place? So, what if you just allowed yourself to understand that? So, run your chart if you haven't already run it. And obviously, I have to separate out the different parts of the chart to talk about them. But you are the whole human. You are the whole body graph chart together, right? It's all of the pieces working in conjunction. So if you want support working with all of the pieces together, then that is the work that I do one-on-one. So either send me a DM or send me an email and we can explore what that might look like. Until next time, I am sending you the strength to let go of what no longer serves you, joy to fill your days, and the clarity to be who you came here to be.